Welcome to the sixth and the final part of a series of presentations on understanding the universal business language. This tutorial covers the customization of UBL and trying to align UBL with your business requirements. First of all, it's been recognized that no standard business language will cover all requirements. UBL followed what we refer to as an 80-20 principle. So 20% of UBL matches 80% of people's requirements, but the remaining 20% may require some additional business rules or additional information. And there are two typical requirements for customization. One is to restrict, in other words, to limit the things that may be exchanged, the information that may be exchanged. And the second is to extend, to add things that aren't there. And that customization may apply to the models, the structures, the schema, and also the values. So the things, the information itself, be they codes or identification schemes. When you customize UBL, you can actually customize to be conformant, which means that you still conform to the standard. Your documents still validate as UBL standard documents. Or compatible, meaning that you follow the principles, but you've changed some of the model. Let's first of all talk about restriction. So restriction may involve restricting the model or the structures, for example, removing optional components, or maybe restricting possible values. So adding a code list or a field length is restricting the possible values. Adding constraints to data types, also ranges, for example, may be a restriction. Limits to the codes possible. By definition, these customized documents are a subset. Restrictions are a subset. In the same way, for example, if you've ever seen EDI implementation guides or message implementation guides, they are really restricted subsets. In UBL, we refer to these as profiles. Now, restricted documents should be conformant. There's no reason why you shouldn't have conformant restriction. And that means that the XML documents you create are valid as UBL documents. And this is the approach followed by many of the government implementations of UBL in public procurement, such as the Danish OIO and the Northern European subset. And I'll use the Northern European subset, the NES profile, as an example of this. So if we look at the way the NES group have defined delivery, they've effectively taken the UBL structure for delivery and indicated with a cross the things that you're not allowed to send. Some of the things you must send and some of the things that are optional. Now, another significant point here is that the NES profile is just a piece of documentation. It's either a diagram or a table or a list that identifies the elements of UBL to be used. To validate that requires additional checks made independently of UBL, and typically and increasingly people use technologies such as schematron to validate that your particular restriction follows this profile. That has nothing to do with UBL. That's an implementation decision. Here's an example of how you would specify in a UBL document which profile you're actually using. In other words, identifying an additional set of business rules. So normally in every UBL document you identify the version of UBL, but you can also specify a customization, which is a name of a project. In this case, it's the OIO UBL version 2 customization. And that contains many profiles, including this one, which is the order simple, billing simple profile. It has a code or a URI that points to the documentation of this. So, as I mentioned, these profiles are really descriptive texts. They are descriptions of what should be and shouldn't be used. They are additional rules that apply above and beyond the standard UBL. But as well as restriction, there are occasions when people need to extend UBL. An extension can mean creating new structures, extending the cardinality, for example, making things which are optional mandatory, and it can mean creating new data types, so not any of the existing UBL data types, or not derived from them either. Extended documents are a subset, or a superset. They are more than in the standard UBL document. Now, UBL provides a mechanism in its architecture for allowing extended documents, the superset, to be UBL compatible. In other words, to still validate with the UBL standard schema. And you can follow the UBL's extension architecture to do that. You can also submit extensions as candidates to OASIS UBL Technical Committee to be incorporated into future releases. And actually, that's been a very common way for the UBL library to grow. So the UBL extension feature is part of the UBL standard. It was designed to allow structures to be added to the UBL schema to make them still valid. And it uses a particular XML schema construct known as XSD-any. And as it sort of self-explanatory, that allows any content to be added into the structure. It can be used to keep technical interoperability if nothing else fits, and it's better than trying to repurpose existing components in the standard to fit your business requirement. If you do choose to go down the path of using the UBL extension, it's very useful and good practice to register that so we can encourage consistent usage. And an example is the use of the UBL digital signature. So the digital signature, the standard UBL digital signature, as it is now, is an extension. It uses the UBL extension feature. And so if you require digital signatures in your documents, it's good practice and standard UBL, if it's following a standard, to use the UBL digital signature extension. So let's have a look at what the extension looks like as a structure. It has a lot of information to identify it, and even a reason. And the content itself goes into this structure here, the extension content. If you've looked very closely, you'll see that the common basic component, ID and name, are the only two components here that come from the standard UBL library. Things like extension, agency version, URI, reason code, and content are defined independently of the common library. So the UBL extension is independent of that. And here's an example. This is actually an example taken from the Danish implementation of UBL to support additional legacy edifact information that couldn't be provided in any other form and is necessary for some of the processing of documents. So it's a legacy invoice material, that's why it's there. And you can see under the extension content, we have a thing that looks awfully like EDI message segments. So the extension can contain any content and any structure of any content. To aid in customizing UBL, we provide in the UBL standard a set of required code lists and suggested code lists and a validation methodology. The truth about code lists is that there are many. There are diverse in their consistency, and they change over time. So it is very difficult to enforce a standard code list at a universal business level. So UBL provides code list values, and it provides a mechanism for validating those values, but they aren't part of the UBL schema itself. So it is a requirement on people who implement UBL to elect their code list and validate that their documents meet those codes. If you do decide that you need to build an extension to UBL, you can use the UBL naming and design rules to ensure that you follow the same design practice as the rest of the UBL schema. And there is a custom and extension methodology document that is available to guide you in the design of that extension. There are also sample scenarios and document instances and a range of modeling artifacts. So if you have a business analyst who likes to work with the UML, or a technician who likes to work with ASN.1, or a business person who's far more comfortable with spreadsheets or HTML pages, all of those artifacts are available to help you understand the structures of UBL. And finally, there is a user community website that contains an ongoing list of tools and supporting resources for using and implementing UBL. So the question we posed at the very beginning of this series was, does UBL meet your requirement? And there is a sort of a footnote to this, that if the answer to that is not quite, then we have to recognize that that is the fact, the reality of using standards. So we often compromise our requirement to meet standards, and the example often used is buying clothes off the peg. Very few of us get tailor-made suits. And this is applied throughout the development of information technology as well. There was a time when everybody thought they had to have their own operating system, a time when everybody thought to have their own database, and a time when everyone thought they needed to have their own browsers. And we've gradually rationalized into a smaller number of those things. And that's because the market chooses commodities that best meet their requirement and work around its limitations. Accounting software is another case in point. We change our practice to meet the software that we have. We don't force the software to do things because we do it that way. And the exchange of business information hasn't to date had that economic choice. There's not really been the equivalent until UBL. So it's worth asking the question of to whether UBL meets your requirement, or can your requirements adapt to meet UBL? So thank you very much. This is the end of the presentation on customizing UBL, and the final in the whole series on the Understanding the Universal Business Language. Thank you for your attention.